This episode contains graphic content that may not be suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat with someone at 988lifeline.org. Those outside of the US, reach out to someone at your local crisis center or hotline. Please do not suffer in silence. At 10:54 p.m. on July 29, 2020, a silver 2013 Chevrolet Impala was found engulfed in flame in an alleyway in Tacoma, Washington. Located along the 1600 block of Court E Road in the downtown area, this was a location that did not receive much through traffic. There weren't any houses or businesses near the alleyway, making it the perfect place to torch a vehicle within the city of Tacoma. Authorities quickly arrived and began to quell the flames, before trying to determine who the owner of the vehicle was. After some time, it was determined that a 50-year-old woman from nearby Auburn was the vehicle's owner, but she was nowhere to be found. In fact, as detectives would soon learn, she hadn't been seen since approximately 3 p.m. on July 27th, more than 2 days beforehand. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, police would attempt to untangle the confusing and tragic details surrounding this crime. This is the story of Diana Davis. Diana Davis was born on June 25, 1970 to her parents Sylvester Davis and Kui Chu. Her father was African American and her mother was Korean. She was just one of 4 children, with Diana having a brother, Junior, as well as 2 sisters, Cynthia and Judith. Despite being born in Korea, Diana would move with her family to the States at a very early age, and would grow up in the state of Washington. At first, over on the eastern side of the state, in Spokane, where she attended and graduated high school. In early adulthood, however, she relocated to the western side of the state, attending Shoreline Community College and Green River Community College. In the past, Diana had found work as a certified nursing assistant, but by July of 2020 was working as an in-home caregiver in Tukwila, just north of SeaTac. She lived not too far away from there, in Auburn, and was known to usually keep to herself at home. She lived a rather humble and quiet life, but enjoyed spending most of her time around other people, primarily her family. By July of 2020, Diana was 50 years old, and she had 2 adult children, Christina and Christopher, who had given her 3 grandchildren. A hands-on type of grandmother, Diana's daughter, Christina, described her as the type of person who came into a room and made everybody laugh. In a romantic sense, Diana had been trying to find someone to spend her life with for some time, a task that was made more difficult by the COVID-19 pandemic, as I'm sure some of you can testify. For months, Diana had been seeing someone, who we'll refer to as her boyfriend, but the two didn't quite see eye to eye on how committed they were to each other and their relationship. However, they continued to see each other, and he was ostensibly Diana's boyfriend during this period, but I'm using that term, boyfriend, with quotation marks. However, more on him later. When not working or spending time with her friends or family, Diana could often be found gardening. Ever the green thumb, Diana's gardening hat was never too far away from her. By July of 2020, Diana had seemingly settled rather comfortably into her life. She was beloved by those that she worked with, typically the elderly, and she had good relationships with her kids, her grandkids, and her friends. Nobody seemed to really have a bone to pick with her. The most pressing issue in her life wasn't even much of an issue. Diana wanted to find a soulmate, but she seemed to be enjoying the current search for the one, and had settled into a comfortable, casual relationship with someone for the time being. Diana's friend, Sonia McCoy, would tell reporters with Cairo 7 News, "She's a free spirit. She doesn't play by other people's rules. She lives life to the fullest. She's very helpful. She'll give you her last." Monica Joseph, one of Diana's longtime friends since they were 13 years old, had been in constant contact with Diana almost every single day since then. She would tell reporters about Diana. "She's personable. She talks to everybody. She's very likable, lovable." Monday, July 27th, 2020, unfolded just like almost every other day amidst the COVID-19 pandemic shutdown. Almost all of you remember it well. Social distancing policies were still in place, not only the ones enacted by local governments, but also the vast majority of businesses. That day, Diana spoke to her son, Chris, who later told Fox 13. "She was going out to her garden. When I spoke to her, she was already headed there." At around 3 p.m., Diana made it to the community garden in Tacoma's Proctor neighborhood, where Diana kept a plot of vegetables. While there, she was seen by another local gardener, who had gotten used to seeing Diana out there for some time. Furthermore, we know that Diana made it to the community garden because she would take a photo of a tomato that had been growing on a vine there, and she sent the photo to her boyfriend, planning to bring it with her for the two of them to eat during dinner. He responded positively, and that seemed to be settled. However, after this, Diana Davis would seemingly disappear. No more text or calls would be placed from her phone, and she did not show up to dinner that evening at her boyfriend's house. Later, he and members of Diana's family would attempt to figure out what had happened to her, ultimately requesting a wellness check be done at Diana's home in Auburn. However, police responded to her home and received no response at the door. Because nothing otherwise seemed amiss, that just seemed to be that. Over the next 2 days, friends and family members of Diana's would grow increasingly worried, but just had to hope that she would surface again, that this would all have been some comical misunderstanding. Yet, Diana was the type to keep in constant contact with everyone, constantly calling and texting, so this disappearance seemed very much unlike her. As it turns out, it was. That brings us back to July 29th, the date in which Diana's vehicle was found in a Tacoma alleyway, having been set on fire. By the time authorities showed up at the scene that evening, at around 11 p.m., the vehicle was engulfed in flame. It had been found in an alleyway in an area of town where Diana would not typically go, especially not at night. It was also not an area that she had ever been known to go to before, roughly halfway between the infamous Hilltop neighborhood and the Tacoma waterfront. This was just over 3 miles southeast of the community garden that she had last been seen at, and not too far away from the St. Joseph Medical Center. Yet this was an area without any other buildings nearby, so there were no security or surveillance cameras, making it the perfect spot to set a car on fire. If you asked me, this would indicate some intricate knowledge of the area. By the time firefighters and police arrived at the scene, the vehicle was already engulfed in flame, which indicated that some kind of accelerant had been used, such as gas, lighter fluid, etc. The license plates had been removed from the vehicle, and it was later determined that the flames had originated near the back of the car, possibly the back seat, not the engine compartment, as you might expect, again indicating that this fire had been intentionally set. Police would track the vehicle's VIN number to determine its owner, Diana Davis. However, attempts to track down the woman from Auburn were unsuccessful, and it was discovered that her own friends and family had not seen or heard from her since July 27th, 2 days beforehand, when she had uncharacteristically dropped off the map. After failing to track down Diana, authorities would label her as missing under suspicious circumstances, and would utilize the press to try and track her down. In the days to come, family members and friends would attempt to raise awareness for their missing Diana, with longtime friend Monica Joseph telling Cairo 7. "For us to not hear anything from her, we feel like something is definitely wrong. This has been a nightmare that won't end." 1 week after Diana's burning Chevy Impala was discovered in a Tacoma alleyway, a gruesome discovery was made roughly 70 miles away, near Snoqualmie Pass. There, in a wooded area along Interstate 90, on a U.S. Forest Service road, Diana's decomposed remains were found. Her body had been discovered by a woman walking some dogs who stumbled upon the shallow grave through mere happenstance. One of the dogs led her right to Diana's body, nearly 100 feet in the woods, near an overpass exit ramp. The bottom half of her body had been buried in dirt, but the upper half was still exposed, covered loosely with some sticks and leaves, things of that nature. Exposure to the elements and the local fauna had aided the decomposition process, making the identification difficult, but the remains were eventually positively identified as Diana Davis the following Monday, August 10th. To me, the killer only digging a shallow grave for half of her body indicates that they underestimated how hard it can be to dig in that particular area. The Pacific Northwest generally has pretty hardened soil and heavy roots, especially in these wooded areas. And as someone that grew up not too far away from this and did a fair amount of gardening and fence work, I can guarantee that it's a lot easier said than done. Whoever had dumped Diana's remains here likely did not know that, or at least did not go out to the woods equipped to dig more than a rudimentary hole. While it was pretty obvious at this point, Tacoma police spokeswoman Wendy Haddow confirmed the morbid reality of the situation when she told the public, "We're investigating this case as a homicide." Now, we're going to pause for just a moment to hear a word from the sponsors that make this show possible. After learning about Diana's bizarre disappearance and the subsequent burning of her car, her loved ones had hoped beyond belief that she would come back home, that this would all just turn out to be a mistake or a misunderstanding. But then the news hit them a week later that a body had been found, and that it was likely Diana's. Days after that, the confirmation came that the remains were hers, that there was nothing they could do to bring her back, that whatever conversation they'd had last, that it would be the last one held in this lifetime at least, that Diana, a loving mother, grandmother, aunt, sister, daughter, co-worker, and friend, would never get to make any more memories with the ones that she loved and cherished. Christina Samasa, Diana's daughter, told Cairo 7 News, "You're never prepared for the call that your mom is murdered. You're never prepared for that. To hear that somebody just kind of threw her in the woods is absolutely sickening to me. It's like, why would someone do that to someone's innocent life and take her from her family that really love and miss her truly?" Diana's son, Chris Davis, would tell reporters with Fox 13, "Every night it's hard to sleep. It's hard to eat every day. I've dealt with loss before, but when it's something like this, so unnatural, unexpected, so untimely, I can't really fathom it. This is real life. This isn't a TV show or a movie. There is somebody really out there who had the capability of killing my mom. I feel like we should be talking about this more. There should be a major concern." The investigation into the murder of Diana Davis has been overseen by the Tacoma Police Department, who have coordinated with the King County Sheriff's Office because of the jurisdictional overlap in this case. In the time since this investigation began unfolding 3.5 years ago, detectives have played their cards pretty close to the chest, meaning that not a lot of details have leaked out to the press. That is something that happens frequently in unsolved cases, but in particular because of stories that take place in Washington. Because of the way that the laws are structured, unsolved cases are often handled at the discretion of the appropriate authorities. So, typically whatever information investigators don't want to leak out usually doesn't come out until the case gets solved or it goes to trial. So with that being said, investigators played things rather quietly for the first 2 years of this investigation. but then they began to open up about certain details in 2022, when it became clear that keeping their lips sealed wasn't doing the investigation any favors. In 2022, the lead detective for this case, Jack Nasworthy, began to speak to the press in an effort to raise awareness for Diana's story, and has revealed some details about this crime. It was revealed that Diana's cause of death were blunt force injuries to the head, in particular to her face, with the killer evidently using a hammer in the process. However, due to the decomposition of her remains, it's unknown whether a sexual assault of some kind took place. We know that investigators were able to trace Diana's whereabouts for most of the day on July 27th, when she had last been seen at the Proctor Community Garden in Tacoma. Afterward, she had apparently walked around a local Ace Hardware store for about 45 minutes without buying anything, which an employee later recalled as being odd. After all, this wasn't exactly a big hardware store. Surveillance and security cameras in the region were able to track her vehicle as it made its way through Tacoma that afternoon, first going to the community garden and then to Ace Hardware. After that, cameras were able to trace Diana's silver Chevy Impala northbound onto I-5, headed towards Seattle. However, at this point, the cameras begin to come up short. Her trail goes cold. To make matters even more difficult for investigators, and more confusing for everyone in general, it also appears that Diana's phone was shut or turned off at precisely the same time. A check of Diana's records revealed that her cell phone last pinged up in Seattle, roughly 37 miles north of where she had last been seen. Detective Jack Nasworthy explained to reporters at a press conference in 2022. We found through investigation that her cell phone was last seen in Seattle, just outside Lumen Field, Mariner Stadium, on July 27 at about 7:46 p.m. And that's the last known contact anybody had with her. Unsurprisingly, nothing was really going on in that area at the time. The only live sport really taking place at the time wasn't around. The Mariners were out of town on a road trip until July 31st. And most other live events were shut down because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Even then, because of her job and her general attitude towards life, Diana was someone that had been taking COVID quite seriously, and she tried to avoid crowds, so her going to Seattle in the first place seemed a bit odd. After this, however, Diana Davis seems to have disappeared entirely. Her phone wouldn't ping in another location after this, and it hasn't been seen to this day. Her vehicle was discovered 2 days later, burning in Tacoma, about 37 miles south. Her remains would be discovered near Snoqualmie Pass a week later, 50 or so miles to the east. Yet her final hours seem to have been spent here in Seattle, and to this day, nobody remembers seeing her there. Her whereabouts after this point become a matter of total uncertainty. As this case has remained unsolved over the past few years, many have theorized that Diana may have been lured to Seattle, where her trail seems to have grown cold. If this was indeed the case, then it was likely that Diana had been killed by someone she had known, perhaps even someone that she had been in a relationship with. As I touched upon earlier, Diana had been seeing someone at the time of her disappearance. Her boyfriend was a criminal defense attorney for Pierce County, and their relationship was anything but definite. Friends of Diana's say that her boyfriend was afraid to commit to anything, so their relationship was still in the process of finding its footing, if that. Because of that, both had remained open to see other people, but they seemed to enjoy spending time together. In one of her final known communications, Diana had messaged her boyfriend and sent him a picture of a tomato that she had been growing in her garden. During their messaging, the two had planned to share the tomato with their dinner that night, but that clearly never happened. Based on what I found online, that tomato was actually still unpicked at Diana's vegetable garden. When Diana failed to show up at his house that night for their previously planned dinner, her boyfriend had attempted to reach out to some of her friends and family, worried that something might have happened to her. He was actually one of the early voices to initiate a wellness check, and was later fully cooperative with police. He reportedly answered all their questions, but would still be circled as an early suspect due to the strange circumstances of this crime. After all, he'd been one of the last people to communicate directly with Diana, and had reportedly even seen her a short time before her disappearance. They had been together the previous night, July 26th, and she apparently even dropped by his apartment before heading to the community garden on July 27th, where she was last seen alive. Investigators were intrigued by this boyfriend when they learned about the disagreements he and Diana had in regards to their relationship. They learned that Diana was looking for someone to settle down with, possibly even thinking of marriage, and this boyfriend wasn't interested in that. In short, he did not want to settle down quite yet, and wanted to keep things going as they were, which was, by all accounts, rather casual. Despite being positioned to be a strong suspect in this crime, Diana's boyfriend was questioned extensively by investigators, and was able to provide a pretty definitive record of his whereabouts on the days in question, July 27th through the 30th. He provided receipts from those days, as well as records from work that clarified what he had done and when. Based on the extent of what he provided, investigators felt pretty assuredly that he had clearly not had time to commit this crime. Not with all the driving and work it would have been, driving between Seattle, then Snoqualmie Pass, then Tacoma, trips that would have taken a significant amount of time. After failing to find any evidence linking Diana's boyfriend to the crime, investigators would begin circling around to some of her prior partners. One of them raised some eyebrows, an ex-boyfriend of hers that had become incredibly possessive and jealous near the end of their relationship. After Diana made the decision to end their relationship, he had begun to harass her, and she ended up seeking help on the matter and ultimately took out a restraining order. This ex-boyfriend had continued to exhibit troubling behavior for some time, and was even confronted by Diana's children, who not so subtly accused him of being responsible for her death. However, investigators reportedly checked out the suspect, and discovered that a doorbell camera from one of his neighbors was able to track his comings and goings due to its positioning. Based on that, it seemed like this ex-boyfriend had not left his home during the time that this crime was committed, so he was unlikely to have been responsible. After coming up short in trying to find evidence implicating Diana's recent romantic partners, they then began turning their attention toward another possibility, that her killer had been someone that Diana's friends and family had never heard about. Maybe even someone that Diana did not know that well, and maybe someone that she had been meeting up with for the first time that particular night. While investigating Diana Davis's strange death, police learned that she had been active on dating sites and apps in the recent past. Per Tacoma Police Detective Jack Nasworthy, who's headed this case since it started, she would use dating websites and meet men. And so what I believe is she was traveling to Seattle to meet somebody, and that person is the person who did her harm. If that was indeed the case, that she had met somebody through a dating website or an app, and then she had gone up to Seattle to meet him, it would explain certain aspects of the case. It would explain why Diana's phone had not been found, as it would contain evidence of their correspondence together. It would also explain why she had gone to Seattle without telling anyone, especially if this was to be a sexual encounter with someone. That's not exactly something that she would share with her children, for example, and possibly not even her friends. However, if she had gone out to Seattle to meet up with an unknown acquaintance, then it indicates that this person had gone to great lengths to carry out this crime. They had driven from Seattle to Snoqualmie Pass, a distance of roughly 50 miles. That was where her body had been disposed of. And then back down to Tacoma, another 70 or so miles, where her vehicle had later been set ablaze. After that, they themselves would need to get back home, which may have been in either Seattle or Tacoma. If we assume that the killer lived in Seattle, that means that Diana would have had to meet them there. Then, after committing this crime and trying to cover it up over the span of roughly 2 days, they then needed to make their way back to Seattle. I wonder if local rideshare companies like Uber or Lyft keep records of passengers that made their way from Seattle to Tacoma, or vice versa, in those 2 days. Or perhaps if the local commuter transportation, like the buses and the light rail, had cameras active in their stations on those days. If we assume that the killer lived in Tacoma, then that would explain a few more things. It's possible that Diana met this person there in Tacoma, which is why she needed to spend roughly 45 minutes walking aimlessly around a random Ace Hardware without buying anything. After this, perhaps they met and went up to Seattle, where their trail eventually went cold. After this, the killer disposed of her body near Snoqualmie Pass, and then drove her vehicle back to Tacoma. There, he set it on fire and was able to either walk back to his home or he caught a Lyft or an Uber or something like that, maybe even a bus. Regardless of where Diana had originally encountered this killer, either Seattle or Tacoma, it seemed apparent that this had been a premeditated crime. Per Detective Nasworthy, "A random act of violence. You're not going to go through that level of planning to hide it. This person is concerned enough that he goes to extreme measures to destroy evidence. This person went through a lot of effort to cover up this crime. Not only did they take her out into the woods and bury her in a place that they probably didn't think she'd ever be located, but they also went through the effort to burn her car to hide evidence." Investigators themselves seem quite invested in the theory that Diana met her killer through a dating website or an app, but are still missing the one piece of evidence that could confirm this theory: Diana's cell phone, which would have had all of her correspondence on it, stuff that wasn't in her cell phone records, such as dating apps and chat logs, browsing history, emails, or anything from messaging apps like WhatsApp or Signal. As stated by Detective Nasworthy in 2022, "Our working theory is that she arranged to meet somebody in Seattle the night she disappeared, but her cell phone was never recovered, so we don't know who she was contacting." Detectives reached out to at least one dating site that she had used in the past, Match.com, but they learned that her last login there had been about a month prior to her initial disappearance, so it's unlikely that it played any part. However, it would become known that Diana was involved in some kink lifestyle stuff, and had visited bondage websites to chat and meet up with others in the past. Investigators theorized that after failing to reach a compromise with her current boyfriend on the exact terms of their relationship, she had decided to meet up with someone from another dating app or website, possibly someone interested in the bondage lifestyle, and this ended up being the person who took her life on the evening of July 27, 2020. More after the break. While I'm never one to try and connect dots that may or may not be there, the story of Diana Davis has sadly been mostly forgotten about throughout the Pacific Northwest. There were a lot of louder things happening in the world at the time that she was killed, and she was sadly just one of a few women who lost their lives in a similar fashion over the past few years. One of these women was 58-year-old Leticia Martinez Kosman, who went out for a date with a man she met through a dating app on March 31st, 2023. Some of you likely heard of her story as it happened. She went with her date to a Mariners game in Seattle and took a photo of them together, which she later sent to some friends. After the game, though, Leticia went missing and would not be seen alive again after leaving the stadium with her date. The next day, April 1st, Leticia's adult son, who is disabled, was abducted from the home he lived in with Leticia. The man who abducted him, Leticia's date from the night prior, claimed that Leticia had been in an accident. After luring her son away from their home, this man would attempt to strangle Leticia's son, but was thankfully unsuccessful. Her son got away and sought help. The day after that, April 2nd, Leticia's vehicle was found engulfed in flames. Like Diana Davis, her family and friends hoped beyond hope that she would be found alive and unharmed, but her body was later found in a Seattle ditch on April 12th. She was found roughly 1 mile away from where her son had escaped his strange abductor, having been partially buried. An autopsy later determined that she had been strangled to death. In Leticia's case, however, a culprit was identified, thanks to her having sent a photo of the two to friends before her death. Her likely killer was identified as 46-year-old Brett Gritchell, who had a spotty criminal record and cuts and scrapes on his face and body when he was found. To date, he is currently awaiting trial, but it's hard not to see the similarities between Leticia's case and Diana's. Both went on dates with a man they met through a dating app. Both were last seen alive in Seattle near T-Mobile Park, where the Mariners play. The culprit attempted to dispose of the bodies by burying them in a half-assed way, and in both cases, the offender had tried to burn their vehicles to destroy evidence. Yet, there are some distinct differences. In the case of Leticia, the culprit had attempted to abduct and strangle Leticia's adult son, whereas in Diana's case, the offender appears to be someone that the family never knew of. Leticia was also strangled, whereas Diana was beaten to death. As I mentioned, Leticia's likely killer, Brett Gritchell, was identified and later detained by authorities. He is currently awaiting trial, and I can only assume that investigators have looked into him as a potential suspect in Diana's case. However, the murder of Leticia Martinez Kosman is not the only similar case to unfold over the last few years. On November 7th, 2022, 41-year-old Patricia Soto was last seen alive in the Burien area, a suburb just south of Seattle. She had been known to frequent the Granite Falls and Everett area, but before her disappearance, she had been spending a lot of time in Burien and Des Moines, the city just outside of SeaTac, not the capital of Iowa. Family and friends say it wasn't unusual for Patricia to disappear for stretches of time, but never for that long, and never without telling anyone. She was reported missing a few days after her disappearance, but no sign of her was located until December 21st. Roughly 4 days before Christmas 2022, Patricia's vehicle was discovered at an auto yard in Graham, down in Pierce County, not too far away from Tacoma. A search of the vehicle revealed that Patricia's body was inside, but the details of her death have never been revealed to the public. Yet, she was labeled by investigators a victim of homicide. Sadly, nothing has been published on her case since January of 2023, and her case remains unsolved. Then, there is the story of 25-year-old Callie Childers, a young woman from Longview that had moved to Marysville, north of Seattle, in 2020. She would later be seen living a transient lifestyle in Everett months later. On September 7th, 2021, her body was found near the Rock Mountain Trail, roughly 35 miles east of Stevens Pass. The same day that her body was found, her vehicle, a black 2013 Chrysler 200, would be found along the 6200 block of Lowell-Snohomish River Road, in an area between Everett and Snohomish. Like Diana Davis, her vehicle had been set on fire and was burning bright by the time authorities arrived at the scene. Callie had reportedly fallen in with a rough crowd before her death, and her family had grown concerned for her safety. Her death was labeled a homicide by investigators, yet there's been no movement on it since 2021. Some early statements by investigators hinted at a potential link to gang violence, but the case is still unsolved. Callie Childers left behind 2 children, who I can only hope have managed to cope in the wake of their mother's loss. I found an article on her case published on Fox 13, which contained one of the most heartbreaking quotes I've ever heard. And because I had to read it, you have to hear it. In this article, Callie's friend Laura Gomez, who had taken over care of Callie's 5-year-old daughter, said, "On her birthday a couple days ago, she asked if her mom had forgotten her birthday, and we gave her gifts and said they dropped from the sky, and she ran to the window to tell her she loves her." I'm sorry, it's a stark reminder that these stories are real. I know all of us with an interest in true crime, we find it interesting to learn about the nuts and bolts of the police investigation, but at the end of the day, these women had people who loved them. In some cases, people who depended on them. Diana had 2 children and 3 grandchildren. Leticia had a disabled son that she cared for, and Callie Childers had 2 children that did not quite understand what heaven was when they were told that their mother was now there. It's just hard for me to process this stuff at times. I end up thinking of my daughter having to deal with this shit, and it fills me with a sense of dread I never knew existed. Anyhow, sorry about that. It's unknown if any of these cases are linked in any way. However, the similarities between them are hard to ignore. Considering 3 of the 4 remain unsolved, I can only hope potential links have been explored by investigators. Nearly 4 years later, the murder of Diana Davis remains unsolved. To date, there has been almost no coverage of the story on a national scale, other than being featured on a couple of podcasts, and there has been little attention drawn to it since Tacoma police tried to highlight it in 2022. Yet, Diana's family and friends continue to hope that justice will be done. Her son, Chris, told reporters with Fox 13, "Somebody cut my mom's life short. My mom just turned 50, and I feel like she had 50 more years in front of her. She was so full of life." Diana's daughter, Christina, would tell Cairo 7, "I have a lot of questions because I don't know why anyone would want to do this to her. She was not a violent person. She was more of a giver than anything. Justice is going to be the ultimate closure, but it's never going to bring our mom back, so it's never going to feel the same." However, while this case remains frustratingly unsolved, It's believed that during their examination of Diana's remains, the Washington State Patrol were able to retrieve at least a partial DNA sample of an unknown male from under her fingernails. If so, this would indicate that a DNA match could be made, but it would likely have to be a direct match, as in, investigators aren't able to submit it into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. Rather, they would need a suspect. From there, they could compare the two samples to see if they match. It's been reported that Diana's boyfriend had his DNA tested and compared to this partial sample, thus concluding that he likely had nothing to do with it. However, it remains possible that once Diana's killer is identified, this partial sample could be used to pin his ass to the crime scene. Investigators are interested in learning more about the circumstances of Diana's initial disappearance, and would like to speak to anyone that might know where her vehicle went in the time between she originally disappeared, on July 27, 2020, and when it was found burning in an alleyway in Tacoma, July 29th. It was a silver 4-door 2013 Chevy Impala, with the license plate BSR0058. Try and think and remember if this sounds familiar. If you live in the area, check your phone records or your social media activity for the dates in question. Try to think if you were in the area and might have encountered Diana or her vehicle. Investigators are also interested in hearing from anyone that matched or communicated with Diana on dating apps or websites during this period. For starters, they're merely interested in learning which services she was using and what she may have been looking for, as any of this information could potentially lead police straight to her killer. So again, everyone, if you lived in the area at the time, check your timeline. Try to see if you or someone you know may have seen Diana or the person she was with in the vital time frame that she originally went missing, on the evening of July 27, 2020. She was likely in the company of a man near Seattle that day, but her remains were disposed of in Snoqualmie Pass and her vehicle was found burning in Tacoma 2 days later. Anyone with information is encouraged to reach out to Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-TIPS. Once again, that's 1-800-222-TIPS. Information can be submitted anonymously, and those that do so could be eligible for a $1,000 cash reward. They can also help a grieving family find justice. Until such a time, the story of Diana Davis will remain unresolved. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Unresolved. I have been your host, Michael Whelan. Like most episodes, this one was also researched, written, and produced by myself. I also put together the music heard throughout the episode, except where noted in the show notes. Since one of you asked, I usually figure out the music after I record, so that's why I don't mention any specific artist here. Anyhow, the producers of this show, who support the show each month on Patreon, are Roberta Jansen, Sarah Moscaratolo, Brandy Nordine, Jacinda Klass, Alex Kellergopoulos, Scott Meesey, Ben Crocum, Patrick Loxo, Marion Welsh, Lauren Nicole, Sally Ranford, Riddis Baugh, James Weiss, Stephen Diaz, Derek Smith, Heather Fiddler, and Crystal J. Thank you all for your continued support. It really does help keep the lights on, so to speak. I'd also like to take a minute to thank the rest of the patrons who support the show each month on Patreon. You can become a producer or a patron by heading to patreon.com/unresolvedpod, where you can get access to our entire archive of bonus episodes, as well as the Patreon exclusive show, Resolved. For everyone else, thanks for listening. Make sure to continue spreading word of the podcast with your friends, family, on social media, or just wherever you get a chance. Thanks for those of you who do, and a special thanks for those of you who are continuing to give the podcast great reviews on Apple Podcast and other podcast platforms. Those really go a long way. If you're not going to sign up for Patreon, that's the other best way to support this show. I should be back with another new episode next week, which, depending on how things work schedule-wise, may be the beginning of another series, or it may be a pretty hot-button issue that'll likely earn me some smoke on social media. Guess we'll see. Anyhow, until then, stay tuned, stay healthy, stay active, and most importantly, stay safe. Talk to you all later.